what are custom elements in Kontent.ai? Kontent.ai provides custom elements to allow us to augment and enrich the content that we're managing within the CMS with external sources or additional pieces of functionality to improve the editorial experience within the CMS. The way we develop custom elements is using the Custom Elements SDK, which is a JavaScript library that allows us to work within the framework of the CMS content inventory. What I wanted to do in this video is just give a really simple example of how you can build a really basic custom element. And then in later videos, we'll look at some other features that we can use with custom elements to improve the workflow. So the custom element we're going to look at today, you're not going to need it in a production environment, but it just lets you understand how the custom element SDK works and what you need to do. So let's dig into that. What I'll start with is looking at my content model. So I've got a really simple content type here that I've called custom elements simple text. When we're designing this content element, we've used this content element type here, which is called custom element, and it has a few properties that we are interested in. The first element that we see is the hosted code URL. So this is where we're going to save our custom element code. Typically, it's going to be on the same website as your application if you've got a web application. If not, then you're going to need to host this somewhere. I'm just going to be running this on my local development environment. So you can see over here, I've got localhost 5001. That's where I'm going to host this. We've got some other features here for this demo I'm not going to use right now. First one is the custom elements we're allowed to read. I've got nothing else in here, so there's nothing in this drop down, but this is going to tell me about other elements that we might be able to look at and interact with this custom element. And last, by no means least, we've got the parameters, which is a JSON file. We're going to use this field to store any additional settings we may want to use. Now, in this particular example, I don't have any. Again, it's a very, very simple element. You can probably guess right now from the name, simple text, but I just wanted to run through it from a code point of view to have a look. So this is what the content model looks like. If I pop over to Visual Studio Code, so this is the custom element that we've got open here. As you can see, it's just a HTML file. There's nothing overly complicated about it here. And inside here, I've got a very basic text input field and then kind of a bunch of functions down here. I'm going to collapse them up and we'll go through them one by one. And most of them are fairly straightforward to understand, as I said before. First thing we're doing, we're adding an event listener onto that input field. We're going to call a function called setValue, which we'll cover in a moment. So every time we change that text field, these two methods, our functions, are going to be triggered. The first thing we do after we've initialized all of our variables is we're going to look at initializing the custom element, and that function is here. And it's really simple, really straightforward. We're going to go in, we're going to initialize the custom element, and we're going to say if it has a value, then I'm going to go and get the value out of the API. So this isn't the value on the component in the CMS that we can see. This is the value stored in the background. Okay, so we're going to check whether it's got a value, and if it has got a value, we're going to tip that value into the value of the input field. In this example, it's really straightforward. It's just text, so I can just do value equals value, and that's fine. If you have something a little bit more complicated, maybe you need to pass some JSON or something, then you would want to do that here when you're going to get that value back. And then we call the update size method. Update size is just simply there to resize the element on the page. So if all of a sudden it's a lot longer, because this is presented essentially in an iframe, we want to make sure that everything remains visible, but we also don't take up too much space with our custom element and end up with a huge quantity of blank white space at the bottom. Once we've done that, we're just reacting to changes of things being disabled. So let's say, for example, we're looking at a published content item. This will get triggered to say, well, actually it's disabled, so you can't modify anything. And update disabled, just so you can see the function. It changes a toggle, which we use elsewhere. Okay, let's have a look at update size. This is my implementation of it here. We're just changing the height of the custom element based on the height of the HTML object within the loaded page. And set value here, really simple function that basically says so long as this element's actually enabled, we're just going to set the value to whatever the value is or null. Some interesting things then to look at that. So we've seen that it's fairly straightforward. Let's go and have a look at actually how it works in real life. So here's my version of this content element. If I go into it, I can see that I've already been playing with it. By default, it would load and it would look like this. If I go and view that in Postman, this is Postman using the REST API to go and get it. I can see there's my element. The value is null. That's its type. That's its name. That's the information about what we've got going on there. If we head back and add some values in, so hello world, the old classic, in there, we can see up here, that's moved into saved. So again, if you go back to Postman and have a look, it says hello world. There are some interesting things that then go with this. So if I go back to the content model, and I'm just going to change this to be a required field and click Save Changes. We're not necessarily going to see much difference here, other than if I get rid of that text, it tells me that the item's not filled in properly. So we're never going to be able to publish that because it's a required field. Now, the interesting thing with validation on the custom elements is if it has a value, it is interpreted as being valid. There's no other way to validate a custom element. So you can't store the editor's value but still mark it as invalid at the moment. But yeah, that's it. That's the very basics of a custom element. As I said, you're not going to use this because there's already a text field, but you can kind of get a very basic view of how these works. I'll make sure there's a link in the description of this video to the library where this is, so you can kind of have a look at it and work yourself through it a little bit more. All this does is show you how the information is stored and retrieved in the custom element. What we can look at in later videos are observing other elements within the content item, looking at information from other content items within the CMS as well, integrating with third-party APIs. So let's say you may want to provide a list of videos from YouTube and allow the user to select, or maybe it's something a bit wider like your own custom Cloudinary plugin, so you can select images really nicely from digital asset management to insert into your content.